Hello. This afternoon I'm going to give you some instruction on how to safely and correctly put a new string on your gamba. This operation can usually be achieved without the use of any tools, but it can be helpful if you have some or all of the following available: a pencil, a nail file, either scissors or wire cutters, either some tweezers or a small pair of long-nosed pliers, a box of matches or a lighter, and some peg dope, or if you have no peg dope, some dry soap and blackboard chalk. We're going to be dealing mostly with the conventional wooden friction peg, but as many of you now have the mechanical pegs or peg heads, I will also give you some instruction on how to put strings on those correctly. There are more than two places on the instrument that are affected by the changing of the string. Not only the tailpiece to which you will attach it at this end and the peg to which it goes on this end. The third area on the instrument that's important when changing the string is the bridge. The string has to pass through a groove on the bridge, and you have to make sure that the bridge is in the right position. It's also important to remember only to change one string at a time. If you want to put on a whole new set and you take all the old strings off, the bridge will fall and probably the sound post with it. And I know that some of you want to exercise your Second Amendment right to bear a sound post setter, but my advice is don't mess with it, leave it to a professional. So if you leave all the other strings on while you're changing the one, the bridge and the sound post will stay where they were and you don't have to worry about any of that. First, let's take the old string off. So we loosen it from the peg. And when you're taking it off the tailpiece, there's a possibility you might at some point want to put this string back on. And you want to preserve it as best you can. So instead of just pulling the string randomly through the hole, protect it with finger and thumb as it comes down so that the string is actually bearing on the flesh of your thumb and not on what could be the sharp edge of the hole in the tailpiece. After I've taken the old string off, I want to make sure that the peg is moving smoothly and easily in the hole, that it doesn't go click, 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 and that it doesn't require an awful lot of effort to turn it. At the same time, it's not just spinning in my hands. So what I can do to avoid all of that is to add just a little bit of what we call peg dope to the two places on the peg that actually bear on the walls of the peg box. Just a little, not a whole lot. Put the peg back in and turn it both ways, pushing as you do so, and then just keep turning the way you would to tune it up. And that's going to make the peg hold better and turn more smoothly. If you don't have the peg dope available, which you can buy from a music store pretty easily, you can use a combination of dry soap and chalk. I'll show you how to do that on the top peg. We'll take the old string off, take it out. The likelihood is that the peg is a little sticky. So if I rub on some dry soap and put it back in and turn it, that's moving very smoothly. Maybe a little too smoothly. If when you get the string on, it slips very easily, take some blackboard chalk and apply about the same amount of chalk to the same spots on the peg. Push it back in, the same routine, wiggling it about, pushing it in as you go, and finish off turning the peg as you would for tuning up. So I've removed the lowest string, and here is my new one. and I'm going to put the top end through the underside of the tailpiece. And while I pull it through, I'm making sure that my finger and thumb are holding the string to keep it away from the sharp edges of the hole in the tailpiece. You can either rely on the knot on the underside of the hole to keep the string anchored, or you can pass it through the loop that's already tied there for you. And since the other strings on this instrument are tied that way, that's the way we'll do it on this string. And you pull the loop back as far as it will go. Then check where it's going to cross the bridge. You can take your pencil, add a little graphite to the groove, make sure there are no sharp edges that are going to fray the string. Same thing at the nut. Lubricate the groove, make sure there are no sharp edges. You can't always see them, but they're often there. And then take the end of the string through the string hole in the peg, leaving about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch sticking out the other side. Turn the first turn round the peg on the far side of that short end of the string. And this is a little difficult. It can help to loosen this string, the next door string, a little bit and move it over so you've got a little more room to work. So the first turn goes on the far side of the short end of the string and then comes round on the side nearest you. Make sure the string's on the bridge, in the nut, and put some tension on it, allowing the string to wrap itself around the peg close to the inside of the peg box. Don't go all the way up to pitch straight away. Go back to your bridge, make sure that it hasn't started to pull forward with the friction of the new string. And if it has, just push it back a little bit. You can do that either with your fingers or by pinching the string between your thumb and forefinger against the side of the bridge, and it will just click back. You can hear it and know that it's moved back to where it was. Once you've done that, you can then take the string all the way up to pitch. Make sure that you don't have a whole bunch of turns of string round the peg that are jamming up against this side of the peg box, because that will make the peg harder to turn. Similarly, you want enough to allow the string to come off the peg close to the side of the peg box. If the hole that the string goes through is too far along the peg in this direction, the string is going to come off the peg to the nut at an oblique angle that is actually wanting to pull the peg out of the instrument. And you want to avoid that as much as possible. Have the string as close to going straight or pulling the peg in as possible. Now I'm going to the other side, and I'm going to put on the top string. This is your thinnest string, and this has some unique problems. You remember when we put the bass string on, we said we could rely on the knot underneath the tailpiece to anchor the string in place. The top string, especially on a treble, is usually not strong enough to allow you to do that. If you simply tie a knot in the end, it will almost certainly break off because the tensile strength of the string itself is not high enough. So we have to make some sort of a loop, and there are two ways of doing that. We take the end of the string, pass it through the top of the hole in the peg box, bring that short end of string over the long end, and round itself as if you were going to tie a half knot. Then do it one more time, and then pull the string over the top, keeping that short end in place with your finger so that it doesn't slip through. And that will hold the string and stop, and it will not slide out because you've got it wrapped around a couple of times. If you want to be absolutely safe, you could burn a little blob on the end with a match or a lighter. Now I'm going to show you how to tie the loop knot for attaching a plain gut string to your tailpiece. And the first thing I'm going to do is melt a little bump onto the end. Take a match or a lighter, and you'll see that the gut will melt and form into a little lump. About 1.5 inches from the end, tie a half knot and bring the end round, passing the lump through that half knot, and tighten the half knot, making a noose, and there you have a loop that will not slip. In this case, you've got to come again from the underside of the peg box, pass the string through that loop, and pull it tight. Go across the bridge, lubricating your groove again, checking for any roughness. Same with the nut. And now you've got about 5 or 6 inches of string beyond where the peg is, and that's about what you need. Any more than that and you'll have too many turns around the peg. Pass the string through the string hole, leaving about 3/4 of an inch sticking out on the other side. Here you want to make the first turn around the far side of this loose end of the string, and that's where these come in handy. It's often very difficult to get your fingers in between the other strings to keep this loose end where you want it. So I pull that out. Now I've got it round there. Then the second turn goes round the inside of the string, and we slowly wrap it round, making sure that it's back on top of the bridge again, through the nut, and begin to tighten. Check back that the bridge isn't moving, and then bring it up to tension. Now, if when you've done that, you find that you've got more than 2 or 3 turns of string between the string hole and the side of the peg box, you may have too much string there. It's going to slow down the tuning process. So what you can do is take a little of the tension off, take hold of the loose end, and pull it through the hole a bit more so that there's less string wrapping around the peg, and then repeat the process. Again, always checking the bridge. It's unlikely that the bridge is going to fall down because the other strings are in place, but it is always possible, and there's nothing more alarming than concentrating up here, turning pegs, and suddenly hearing this great slap come from the other end because the bridge has slipped over. I've talked about the importance of winding the string close to the inside of the peg box. And the reason for this is that if the string comes off at an angle like this one, you can see it's wanting to actually pull the peg out of its hole. So if we correct that and bring it to the other side, it's now slightly at the opposite angle, which is pulling the peg into the hole. So make sure that each string comes to the side of the peg box and is not wanting to pull the peg out of its hole. The other problem with this one is that there are too many winds. It's going to jam up against the side of the peg box. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to use my pliers, get hold of the short end, pull some of the excess that I don't want through the peg. clip it off, and then rewind it. So the first wind goes on the far side of the peg, and then on the inside. Check that it's in the groove on the bridge and the nut, and then the string is coming to the edge of the peg box, and start to wind, pushing in as you go, checking back against the bridge. And now you can see what I've got. It's a little too far from the side of the peg box. So I'll loosen it again, and I will push those winds across the peg and tighten again. And now it's nice and close to the side of the peg box, and the string angle is pulling the peg in that direction instead of this direction. There are two issues with plain gut strings and economy. The top string, being the thinnest, quite often breaks down here or at the bridge. Your desire is not to buy a new one, but to use what was left at the top end of the existing one, which is why you want to wind all of the rest of that string onto the top peg. And we've seen already reasons not to do that. So for the sake of maybe saving one tie at this end to make the string last a little longer, offset that against the problems you're going to give yourself with tuning and forget about it. Put on a whole new string. Now, at the other end, I can save you. If you've got thick gut strings on the bottom, and for some reason they're not quite long enough, this does happen by the time you've tied a knot in the tailpiece, there isn't quite enough to loop round the peg at this end. You can take the top end of the string and burn a blob on the end like we did with the top string. Then take a thinner string and tie it round it. Then again, burn that end so that it doesn't slip. That's good and tight. And you can use this thinner piece of string as a leader to go round the peg. And that will save you a lot of money. If you're using plain gut for your bass strings, they don't come with a nice loop already made at the bottom. You want to go from this side of the tailpiece, pull it through until you've got enough that you can actually handle, and then simply tie a half knot in the end of the string, which is going to be good and fat. And by the time you've pulled that up tight to the underside of the tailpiece, that will secure your bass string nice and snugly. Now, I know many of you have had peg heads or other brands of mechanical pegs installed on your gambas because they make tuning a lot easier. But they're not without their difficulties. This is a peg head. As you can see, it's a little more complicated than the regular wooden peg. This part with the threaded end here screws into the side of your peg box, and this end then rotates through that, and this stays put. And there's only this very small portion here to take the winding of the strings. This means that you need even less string winding around the peg head than you need on a conventional wooden peg. So let's look at this one. This has a lot of extra string in certain places. Here you can see this is just about right. There's one turn on the far side of the loose end of the string and just a couple of turns on this side. One turn would be enough. This one looks pretty good, but there's too much string on here, and it's going to make it harder to turn that peg. So I'm going to take this one off, and it takes a little longer with a peg head. If you haven't figured it out already, peg heads are made so that if you push the grip of the peg into the shaft, it gets harder to turn, it's stiffer. If you want to loosen it, you pull it out a little bit, and it's almost loose enough to turn like a wooden peg does, but I'm pulling pretty hard to get that. So generally speaking, you have to turn the peg, and it takes a little longer to get a string off. Now I've got to the point where I can pull that excess through, and I'm going to use my pliers. So I've really got a whole lot of string there that I don't want. So I'm going to cut that off, leaving about a 1/2 inch sticking through the peg hole, the string hole. Then I'm going to do the same thing, one turn round the far side, and then come over to the next turn goes on the inside. Now, you can see with peg heads, the angle of the string is almost straight. You don't have to worry about bringing the string over to the side of the peg box so that the angle of the string is pulling the peg into the hole, because it's not going to come out of the hole. It's screwed and glued in there. So it can go straight, which is much easier. But there is a problem. If you have too much wound on there, the string can bring itself over to the side of the peg box and start to disappear into the hole, which is not always completely taken up by the threaded part of the shaft. And that means your string is coming off the edge, sharp edge of the hole on the inside of the peg box. And a lot of times it can fray and break right there. So let's see what we can do. With that top string particularly, that's a problem. So let's do the same thing. Get rid of some of that excess string. Pull that through. Then take a pencil or your nail file and push it over so that while you're turning it, nail file is not the best idea, pencil would be better. While you're turning it, you're holding the string well away from the side of the peg box. And then when you've got very close to pitch, you can let it go. And now you can see that string's coming off the peg, but it's not touching the side of the peg box at all. And that will allow you several turns before it starts to move too far against the side of the peg box. One of the tools I suggested might be useful is a nail file. And the reason I included that in the toolkit is in case you find a rough spot on your bridge or your nut. We talked about making sure that you got some pencil in there to lubricate the groove. But if the edges of the groove are a little rough, you can just very gently smooth them down with your nail file. Also, the grooves in both the bridge and the nut don't want to be any deeper than half the diameter of the string. So if you've got a string that's sitting way down in a groove in the bridge, you're creating a lot more friction, which is going to make that bridge want to pull forward more. Now, if it's really bad and it's all jumbled up, I suggest you take it to a professional. But if it's just a little bit too deep, especially on the outer strings, you can take the string away and just carefully remove the wood on either side of the groove until the groove is shallower. And then with the final cut just on both edges, smooth off so you don't have a sharp edge on either side. And that will have lessened the depth of your groove and the string will slide more easily through there. You can also do that with sandpaper, but this is more controlled. If you use sandpaper, you're much more likely to start sanding the next door string, and then it'll fray and break, and you'll wish you hadn't started. So a nail file is a good tool to use for that purpose.